let's look at Washington State to start. All right, Jake Dickert moves on. All right, we love Jake Dickert on this show. All right, we've been high on Jake Dickert since day one when no one else was. All right, he goes over to Wake Forest. Good for him. Nice little pay raise. Going to a little bit more, how you say it, like a stable program, I guess, in terms of like the volatility with what's going on in Washington State. But you hired Jimmy Rogers, right? And you look at that and you're like, who's Jimmy Rogers? And then you look him up and you're like, oh wait, that was the South Dakota State head coach. That's what 27-3 all time in the 2 years that he was there. Went 15-0 in his first season as the head coach there. Won a national championship at the FCS level that year. Was a defensive coordinator that helped build that program to what it is today. Was a GA there, linebackers coach, played there. Like just born and grew up in South Dakota as well. Like you have this guy, right, that is just lives, breathes, and was that South Dakota State program and was so vital to their success. And he moves on over to Washington State, all right, and hired by Ann McCoy, who, by the way, was the interim AD before that. Now she's the full time AD. I think she did a really good job, all right, in her interim time. Okay, just in 1 year, right? She started in June of 2024 as the interim, and I think she did a hell of a job trying to navigate whatever the hell that this last 2 years has been for Washington State. She was there for a full year of it. Well deserved for her. I hear a lot of high praise for her. I don't think that this is a bad hire at all. I think you got a guy like Jimmy Rogers that comes in with a championship mentality. He talks about that all the time, championship mentality, right? And a guy with a good staff, right, that he built, and the relationships that he's made. He's got not a ton of connections, but he talked about his plan to recruit in state and in the surrounding states as well, because that is valuable to that program. And if you're going to be in Pullman, you got to recruit, that Pacific Northwest. But then he also talked about his connections in the Midwest and bringing the best players from that region over. I think is going to add a new dimension to that program that they maybe didn't have necessarily before, which, I mean, you can argue whether or not they did or didn't, but I do think that this is a very interesting hire for Washington State, and I honestly don't think it's a bad one at all.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to look to replicate what their rivals in the Apple Cup did with Washington bringing over Kalen DeBoer. And obviously, he was at other couple stops there, but he got his start at Sioux Falls, right? And he brought over some big time Midwest talent to help build that Washington program. Obviously, compete for national championship there a couple years ago. It'll be really interesting. There is a trend right now of successful lower level football coaches translating to Power Four, and obviously Washington State will be in the Pac-12. We'll see what happens there in terms of what we call the new conference alignments and all that. But for what it's worth, we'll give the Pac-12 the respect and consider it a power conference, for right now. But Chris Kleiman, right from North Dakota State, going to Kansas State. You got Kirk Signetti coming from James Madison when they were FCS, heading over to Indiana. You got Kansas's Lance Leipold, who is at Wisconsin Whitewater D3 program. That's very, very good. And obviously DeBoer at the D2 Sioux Falls. So here comes Jimmy Rogers coming in to Washington State here, and it's kind of a mess. May I say this? Obviously, you talked about, what Ann McCoy did and what she's navigated, and I got to give her credit too for getting some money out of the whole thing, right? The whole program in general, the whole school, getting some money out of the buyouts too, and then kind of salvaging what's left of the Pac-12 and be able to capitalize on the name rights and the branding of the Pac-12, because that still holds so much more weight than the Mountain West does, and for them to able to pivot, which, by the way, they're bringing in some programs who are also investing into their stuff. And I think you're seeing more talent being spread out around in certain spots, just overall depth of talent in college football growing because of the high school, like all that kind of stuff, JUCO and everything else. I do think those media rights deals for the Pac-12, especially with legalized gambling and other stuff going on, like those will be higher than G5 has seen before. So you obviously have chances to succeed. It just won't be what it was. I think some things that concern me about the state of the program in general, and this is not even fair to Jimmy Rogers, but it's just the reality of what he's going to be dealing with, right? He had tremendous resources and tremendous stability at South Dakota State, and also he ended up taking obviously he gets credit for building the culture there and helping kind of grow it into a national power in the FCS, but he walked in as head coach as defending national champions, and
Yep.
obviously you got to give credit for defending that and keeping the culture going and all that kind of stuff. But it will be a little bit of a shell shock here, I do think, in Washington State. Not that it can't succeed, but just will be different. And worth noting, they already talked about having to trim its athletic budget from $85 million, which with the Pac-12 former Pac-12 money, down to $74 million, and what that kind of does for all sports involved. And then also, not even more, you're gonna trim it down one more time, which kind of stinks too. And you have to factor in, not only are you trimming it down, but your revenue pool will grow. Your expense pool will grow actually, because you have the revenue sharing coming in now, and all that kind of stuff too that comes with that. Not to mention, I talked about in the intro here, where you have a lot of faces, new faces in Washington State and Pullman there. You got a new president coming in, right? And I know we just tend to focus on the micro of the football program and the athletic department too, in the athletic program, but it's a nationwide, it's a whole university-wide thing that you need to have buy-in and alignment from the presidents as well. So you're going to have Kirk Schultz retiring in the summer. In comes Elizabeth Cantwell, and she was most recently at Utah State, right? So first of all, in the football program, they're to fire Blake Anderson, which
Tough. It
all
was a
that
tough
was a tough
situation.
decision, and all that kind of stuff that went with that. But she did help hire Bronco Mendenhall, which we thought, and it was my best grade I've had of this entire cycle. And I think hell of a job. Obviously, she's not the only one that gets credit for that, but the fact that they can go and get the buy-in and all that kind of stuff, resources to get a guy like Bronco Mendenhall is fantastic. She also helped push Utah State to the Pac-12, right, and seeing the vision for that too. So she's very familiar with the Pac-12 in the new form that's going to be the revamped Pac-12 and all that kind of stuff. And apparently, like, she has a history of understanding the importance of college athletics on university life, which to me, what I want in my president is just an importance and understanding that exactly that athletics are so important, and you need buy-in from everywhere, especially with the football program, because it is that money maker for you. So it's going to be really interesting. I mean, I kind of wanted to give my process there and all the stuff going on with Washington State in general. Obviously, y'all in Pullman probably know a little bit more than we do. So let us know if there's anything we missed. But yeah, it's just something that you have to talk about for Washington State, because it is the problem. Same problem Trent Bray faced a year ago, right? Jake Dickert a year ago, right? So it's all this kind of stuff going in for a guy who's only 2 years of head coaching experience and 37 years old.
Yeah, and something that concerned me, I guess, like talking and hearing him in his introductory press conference, and he was, I believe, I'm gonna guess paraphrase the question. I guess it was something about like how does he plan to initially use the transfer portal, to revamp his roster? How does he plan to attack that? And he did direct it to kind of like recruiting and stuff, but then he also talked about like he almost kind of deflected what he talked about in the transfer portal. He's like, no, players want to play for us, right? They don't want to play for other teams. It's like, okay, well, slow down for 1 second, okay? So does this mean like you don't really plan on like using the transfer portal or like figuring out how to keep players on your team? Like the buy-in from South Dakota State was immense, right? And part of that was because you were winning, right? First and foremost, because you were winning, right? I think Jimmy Rogers is a great coach. He's young. He relates to a lot of these players. And of the 22 transfers that he brought in, 16 of them are coming from South Dakota State. So that tells you something, that there is buy-in from these players, right? And it's going to be easier to establish the culture that you want when you have all of those South Dakota State players that understand the expectations of Jimmy Rogers and that championship mentality. Jimmy Rogers is a very confident guy, all right? He's got moxie, swagger, or arrogance, whatever you want to call it, all right? He does have that. Is it going to translate really well if he chooses not to use the transfer portal as effectively as he probably should? Because there are going to be competitors in the new Pac-12 that are going to use it, to catch up to the talent level that Washington State's able to bring in, and if you're not effectively using that or understanding how to retain your roster, other than the fact that, like, it just sounded like that, oh, people don't want to leave me, and it's like, I just think that that's maybe a little bit naive of a way to look at it. Maybe I misunderstood what he was saying, and maybe I'm completely wrong in what he was trying to get at. But it just sounded like he was very confident that players were not going to leave. He was very confident that, it's like players are just going to come to Washington State just because they want to come to Washington State. And it's like, I don't know. It just made me a little bit nervous hearing him talk about that. But he's a guy that knows how to win, right? And he's young. He's got a lot of energy. So we'll see. A lot of this for me is wait and see. This is a guy that we've seen him win at the highest level at the FCS. And we talk about over and over again that you can have success as an FCS coach coming to Division One FBS because it's happened so many times. I think about all the guys in this cycle that are coming from FBS levels, that were either position coaches for a year, like Matt Entz and Jeff Choate, that like are moving up, or the guys
Willie
that you've mentioned
Simmons.
before, Willie Simmons, guys that you've talked about before, a bunch of times. I just still am going to be a wait and see, and I think the biggest thing with this hire that you have to look at is what are the expectations of this program moving forward in the new Pac 12? And I don't think that that's an easy question to answer at all. I don't think so. I think fans have this question answered in their heads very well. But for people like you and me and the national media, from outsiders looking in, I think it's difficult to understand and evaluate what exactly is the expectation in Pullman, Washington.
Without a doubt. And it's going to be different because obviously you had a certain expectation in the Pac-12, and then you had an expectation to go in the Mountain West and dominate, and you did that, right? But now you're coming to the Pac-12, and you're seeing this playing field kind of get leveled, where you were standing at the top of the Mountain West, and you've got some other schools that maybe are in better spots to succeed, dare I say, coming into this new Pac-12. Let's look at some of the salaries in this new revamped Pac-12 that I want to compare. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit skewed and a little bit different because you have a guy in, Jimmy Rogers, who was making $300,000 at the FCS at South Dakota State. So any kind of paycheck raise is going to be significant for him and his family. So congrats to them. Obviously, Jimmy Rogers got a 5-year, $1.5 million deal. Big time raise for him. Happy for him for sure. But if you compare that to the rest of the Pac-12, the revamped Pac-12, like it puts you down right at the bottom. You've got Trent Bray over $2 million. You've got Bronco Mendenhall over $2 million. Jay Norvell is pretty darn close. You've got San Diego State, 1.7. You've
Sean
got
Lewis.
Sean Lewis and yep. And you've also Dan Mullen, right, and all that kind of stuff going on there.
Spencer Danielson
getting a big time raise as well. So you're right there, Jimmy Rogers with Matt Entz, which makes sense because you are both FCS coaches. So like the raises will come, especially if the wins come too. So I'm not too worried about that, but I am a little bit worried about that revenue budget and how much is going to be there and how much can be allocated and all that kind of stuff. That tough decisions and conversations that are going to have to be had around athletic departments and budgets all across the country. This is not just a problem for Pullman, but it's a little bit different because you're going from one budget that was significantly higher, and not only do you have to factor in, right, this new income expense from the revenue sharing, but you also have a decreased revenue because of the change in the media rights deal. It's fascinating. It is very fascinating, and we'll see what goes on there. But yeah, I just wanted to bring up his contract details, and it is also like pretty telling, and like a couple reasons why he took the job. Well, first of all, like it's a better job, right? Like going to FBS, like it's a big deal to making that jump. 2, it's 5 times in your salary, which is awesome. Happy for him and his family.
Pullman he got emotional. He got emotional talking about it. What it meant to his family.
Life-changing, generational change. I mean, amazing stuff too. Also, a lot of hard work too. And Pullman is beautiful, right? We love that. Obviously, y'all Cougars fans, Cougs Nation, y'all know that. But also too, like you talked about a little bit, and like with his comments, like it's kind of coming out. Like you have to have a little bit of competitiveness and edge and fierceness to take this job because knowing all that's stacked up against you. And I kind of like that. My coach will see if it pans out. Obviously, arrogance and all that kind of stuff, and like go back to Kirk Snetti at Indiana, talking about
yeah,
all that shit he said. And then all of a sudden he just backed it up. And so that sounds great when you can back it up, but that sounds real. Fans get tired of that very quickly when it doesn't work out for you, especially in the short term. And they got a lot to replace. Now they're bringing a ton of guys, right? It's not only are you going to, and I'll talk about the coaching staff here soon, you're bringing a ton of coaches from South Dakota State, but you're also bringing a ton of players, loyalty, change of culture, right? Things that you're going to have to establish going into Pullman. Like it helps with familiar faces and guys who are bought in already walking in the door. You don't have to worry about them and understand the expectation and culture and all that kind of stuff. Offense, defense, schematically, that just a whirlwind of an offseason makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, I guess let's talk about that a little bit. Jimmy Rogers is like very adaptable. All right, he's young. I think he understands the game very, very well.
Yep.
All right, on defense, they're multiple. All right, it's always four down fronts. It's 4 threes. It's 4-2-5s. Offensively, it just depends on like the staff. He always talks about like I guess any offensive guy or whatever. They always just say we were going to build a offense around our players. We're going to tailor it to them. We're going to get the guys that are good players, the ball in their hand a lot. Whatever. I mean, a lot of coach speak there. When you hear him talk about it, but I'll let you talk about his staff a little bit more. But this staff is going to be it's going to be key in terms of his success at Washington State.
Yeah, without a doubt. So we'll start here. So the offense coordinator is going to be Danny Freund. He's also going to be the quarterbacks coach. He was the co-OC and QB coach in 2024 for South Dakota State. Before that was at North Dakota coaching UND, but Fargo coaching running backs and wide receivers, was the starting quarterback for Notre Dame that season, the captain for them 07 and 08 in the FCS there. The running backs coach, who, by the way, spoiler, is the only coach that is not coming from South Dakota State to Washington State. This will be Donnell Kirkwood. Kirkwood worked with Freund at North Dakota, so that's the connection there. He spent this past season in the Mountain West working with running backs at Wyoming. He was also the running backs coach at Western Illinois before North Dakota a couple years ago. He played running back in Division I for the University of Minnesota from 2010 to 2014. Pretty darn good running back at that. The O-line coach will be Taylor Lucas, was the assistant offensive line coach at South Dakota State. Last season was at Wyoming. 2 years prior to that, was also the O-line coach, or was an O-line for Wisconsin Stevens Point there. Wide receiver coach is going to be Jake Menange. He worked with South Dakota State the past 2 seasons, coaching wide receivers. Before that, gets to start in NAIA as an OC for Northwestern College. That's over in Iowa. Has coached in Division I before. He coached at NIU, working with wide receivers and tight ends. He played college ball at South Dakota State from 2013 to 2017 under Jimmy Rogers, who was the linebacker coach at that time. And lastly, on the offense side of the ball, the tight ends coach will be Chris Myers. He was at South Dakota State this past season with Jimmy. He's coached Tucker Kraft, who's a pretty darn good tight end for them at South Dakota State, the Jackrabbits there. He's also an assistant O-line coach at Oklahoma State, so has that in his background as well.
Yeah, continuity, man. And we've seen this before. We talked about Lance Leipold. If you bring sometimes if you bring your whole staff and you implant it, all right. Sometimes it doesn't work, all right. Sometimes it does. If it's a good staff and they're all aligned and they bring in the players that they want to bring in, and the culture in the community can be built around that, like I have no problem with that. And by the way, I'll give you guys my grade later. It may be not as high. We're talking very highly of Jimmy Rogers. It may not be as high as you guys are expecting based on, how well we're talking about him right now. But year one, I expect, I think less than 7 wins year one would be kind of a disappointment, even with kind of a tougher schedule than the schedule that they had last year. Um, Plug and play in this offense. Jimmy Rogers talked exceptionally high about Zevi Ekas, the quarterback that was bowl game legend in that Syracuse game. He spoke very, very highly of him in his game before he even before they even started practicing. He's just like, yeah, I was blown away watching this kid play in the bowl game. So I think that offense has some good stuff to work with, even though you're losing Williams and some important pieces on that offense.
You've had some pretty darn good offensive players drafted in the NFL from South Dakota State. You're talking about a couple running backs, Pierre Strong, Isaiah Davis, Tucker Kraft, I mentioned earlier, offensive lineman this past season, Mason McCormick, and the quarterback a couple years ago, Chris Adalokan, and Mark Gronkowski over at Iowa now. He could add to that list too, and some others that have transferred all over. But yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Dallas Goddard's on that list.
Yeah, exactly. 2018. Yeah, exactly. So it's just it's going to be tough too, but also this is the side of the ball, the offense that's not like Jimmy Rogers' specialty, right? So he's a defensive guy, so this is the side of the ball that he has to have trust and faith in. So they have to nail it. And it's the same staff he's been working with, so like Yeah,
He
I hope
trusts
it
him.
works out. Yeah, which helps too for sure. Defensively, so the defense coordinator slash linebackers coach will be Jesse Bobbitt. Same thing he did at South Dakota State. He actually worked in Pullman at Washington State back in 2020 and 2021 as a defensive GA and quality control under um, Jake Dicker, which is interesting there. South Dakota State defense was really freaking good the past 2 seasons there. Also, Jimmy Rogers will have his hand in this defense for sure. But it's also nice having a guy you can trust and has had success calling plays there in Jesse Bobbitt for him. Bobbitt also was a linebacker for South Dakota State, just like Rogers was. He was coached by Rogers from 2013 to 2016. He was also a teammate with the wide receivers coach, Jake Manange. So going back, when they were both at South Dakota State, really cool there. The cornerbacks coach is going to be Mike Banks. Same thing. Cornerbacks coach the past 2 seasons with Jimmy Rogers at South Dakota State. The D-line coach, Jalen Bibbs, same thing, coming over being the D-line coach for South Dakota State this past season. Prior to that was at D2 Power Grand Valley State as a D-line coach. And then lastly, you've got safeties coach Pete Manange, and I believe there's relation to Jake Manange there. Was safeties coach for South Dakota State, played safety for Rogers from 2016 and 2017. Also cool there. Does have experience in the FBS working at NIU with safeties and linebackers there. So it's a lot of continuity, a lot of familiarity with the staff here, like we've talked about. And for better or for worse, it's something. Like, it's not a guarantee at all, but like you said, we've seen it before work at Kalen DeBoer staff comes to mind as well. I think with the whirlwind that is this offseason for Washington State, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's got a chance to really help you, coming over from South Dakota State. Now you're all kind of learning through drinking through a fire hose, potentially going to Mountain West and all, or the Pac-12 Mountain West, whatever that's going on right there. But playing from this level of ball, maybe we'll see some adjustment from all of them. But the reality is, I mean, you've had history of success together, so that's all you can really ask for.
I mean, some of the best D2 coaches that we've talked about coming up, D2 D1 coaches that came up to FBS level. I guess Kalen DeBoer was decently young. I mean, he's in his 40s, but I mean, Lance Leipold was old. Chris Kleiman was older. He was older than 50, I think, when he came to Kansas State. Um, I don't know how much it matters, but I think experience matters. It matters a lot. But I don't think it matters as much when you have a staff that is so cohesive. So people are going to have questions about Jimmy Roger and his age and his experience, but having the cohesiveness of this staff, I think, is going to prevent a lot of. I just think having alignment is very important. We've seen programs around the country that are elite recruiting programs, right? Have elite resources. Not going to name any in particular, but you have programs there that didn't necessarily have 100% alignment on the coaching staff for a number of years, despite having the resumes and the experience, you know, and national championship experience, that is, just like Jimmy Rogers, another guy named Jim that I know. Doesn't always translate if your staff isn't super cohesive and they don't establish the culture that they want to. So I think it's interesting, the staff bringing in literally every single person that you possibly could to bring over from South Dakota State. But it could work, And I think year one, you're going to see. I think you're going to see success year one. But we'll see what the future looks like for this program. So, are we finished talking about the staff? Did you want to bring up special teams?
No, not nothing on there. I will say, like lastly on the staff, I am curious to see how they recruit, like in terms of success wise. Obviously, they talked about their plan in winning in-state recruiting, but also having the connections to the Midwest, which most of their staff, obviously, including Donnell Kirkwood, the one outlier who played at Minnesota and he was coached at North Dakota too. So like that, there's that a lot of Midwest, upper Midwest kind of stuff there and connections, on the coaching staff. It will be interesting to see because I will say too, like in the FBS, I think recruiting is much more national than it is at the FCS level. And you're competing with a lot of other programs too for these guys, especially if you aren't the highest bidder. It's hard. It's going to be really hard. And obviously, like the youth and cohesion and all that kind of stuff, like that typically tends to bode well for recruiters in college football nowadays. So that's obviously, a plus for them. So we'll see how that all works out. But that's something I'll be interestingly monitoring this offseason, see how they do an official visit season. And as we move into the season, in even like the spring cycle portal and whatever else goes on there, it'll be something to monitor for sure for the Cougs.
I mean, they brought in 35 guys this recruiting cycle. Not that any of these guys are like nationally ranked. In fact, none of them are, which needs to change at
Yeah.
Washington State. But I don't know. We'll see if they can get enough guys that are that young. That might be the plan too. Like he talked about. Maybe I'm right about him not wanting to use the transfer portal ton because he's just going to bring in a ton of recruits, and the best of the best are just going to filter up and buy in and create a really nice program where they're just churning out guys that are really well developed. But I do think to have success in the modern era, I do think you need to use the transfer portal. So expectations, all right, have to talk about them, all right. I think the expectations are high for Washington State. I know that you talked about the kind of turmoil and turnover that they've had in the athletic department at the president level, with conferences, with the budget, whatever. All right. I still think that, like, in terms of investment into your program and history, and like, I still think that right now, okay, in the next 4 years, 5 years, you still should be competing for championships at the new Pac 12 level every single year. That doesn't mean 10 win seasons every year, right? But every single year you should be competitive. All right, every single year. And I think Jimmy Rogers, that's his expectation too. He talked about his expectation is to have Washington State as a national brand. Whether he'll succeed in that, I don't know. Okay. So when I'm giving my grade, I'm basing it off of that because you have to grade relative to expectations, right? You Chrissy and I grade our curve. It's an A is that you exceed expectations at the place you're hired at. B is you meeting expectations, and C is you not meeting expectations. I think the expectations are very high. All right, which is why I'm going to give it a B minus of a higher. I don't know that there are definitely coaches out there that I think would succeed that I would give a higher grade than Jimmy Rogers. But what was left out there, I don't know because this was just a hire that was decently late into the cycle, right? So I look at this and I'm like, actually, I don't know. No, he was hired in December. I gotta look at the date again, but the point being, yes, there are guys that I would have given a higher grade in this situation. I have questions about Jimmy Rogers. That's why I'm being pretty conservative about this B minus. I still think that he could win 7, 8 games every single year, and that be not meeting expectations based on the schedules that you have and based on the other competition that you have in your conference. I think you should be succeeding at a very high level. But let me hear your thoughts.
Yeah, to me, I'm similar with you in terms of expectations for sure. I mean, yeah, it's, it's Washington State. Like, not to compare it to the Premier League and everything going on there, demotion and promotion, all that kind of stuff. But like, if you want to look at some kind of metaphor, like that's to me, that's the comparison is where you have a team that has the capital and infrastructure to compete at the Power Four level, playing against schools, albeit some pretty high level coaches and programs of the G5 level in the Mountain West there, and being inserted into the Pac-12. Like you should have an advantage. Obviously, you're going to have some drawbacks. And there's concerns, I think, with me and fans and media and all that kind of stuff over in Pullman about the state of the athletic department and the resources and all that kind of stuff. And you know how Jake Dickert was very frustrated. And part of the reason why he left was one, he was going to take some pay cuts. Two, he was told no a lot in terms of things he needed for recruiting and on the field coaches and all that kind of stuff, off field coaches, salaries, whatever it may be, things that hurt Dickert that are also realities for Rodgers. Now, I do think, sometimes you have an opportunity where you have like, not that it got stale because I love Dickert and you love him too. And I think he did wonders for this program in a time of crazy, crazy turmoil.
Crisis.
Yeah, absolute crisis. I thought
His
he
whole time,
handled
from when
that
he was hired to when he left, the whole
ex-
time.
exactly. And for someone, not that it's this new blood is good because the grass is not always greener. Trust me on that, right? Like just because like oh let's get excited about this new young kid and Dickert ran his course that watched it whatever it may be. Even though I don't think that's true at all, but it could be fun. Here's what I'll say though, like with the expectations being super high and where I feel like the program's reality may be in terms of like financial restrictions, and I hate to keep bringing that up. I'm gonna go B minus. I'm with you here. I'm gonna be a little bit lower on that. I still think you should and will compete in the Pac-12. If you do not make a bowl, you talked about it, 6, 7, 8 wins. Like though that's the expectation in 2025. Even with the rebuilt roster, you're bringing what like almost 50 new faces, over 50 new faces, right, and all that kind of stuff. It's gonna be changing hard and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'll be rooting for you though. I mean, we were big. We turned as soon, and we've always kind of rooted for Washington State. I think Old Crimson and all that kind of stuff. Like I think it's made a fan out of all of us there watching game day and all that kind of stuff. Mike Leach and all that kind of the history and tradition there, and late night Washington State throwing the ball all over the yard with some great quarterbacks that they've had. We've always rooted for them, but now more than ever, I mean, it just feels like they're the underdogs, and Jimmy Rogers is a guy that maybe he's going to bring him to life and come in with that edge and that youth and excitement and cool play style and all that kind of stuff that has a chance to revitalize this program and make it a national power, like you said.